The main hall of the Crestwood Hotel wasn't merely a room, it was a declaration. Sunlight streamed through two-story arched windows, landing on the Italian marble floor in long, reverent rectangles of gold. High above, a crystal chandelier, intricate as a frozen firework, scattered rainbows across the hushed, cavernous space. This was a world built not just of stone and glass, but of quiet, unshakable power. And through this cathedral of wealth, Amara Anya Dubois moved like a ghost. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound against the polished floor. Her cart, laden with crisp linens and gleaming cleaning supplies, glided silently beside her. At 28, she possessed a still, graceful composure that her simple navy blue housekeeping uniform couldn't entirely conceal. She had trained herself for this role, had perfected the art of invisibility, head down, eyes averted, presence minimized. It was a skill born of necessity, a crucial part of the 2-year experiment that was nearing its end. Anya was on her knees, meticulously wiping a faint smudge from the base of a marble pillar, when the serene quiet of the lobby was shattered. The heavy glass doors swung open, admitting the Croft family and a gust of cool New York air. Julian Croft, the patriarch, strode in first. At 55, he was the embodiment of old money authority. A tailored suit that whispered its expense, silver hair swept back from a sharp, intelligent face, and a phone pressed to his ear as if it were a vital organ. He was in the middle of a command, his voice a low, confident growl that sliced through the lobby's calm. "No, Henderson, I don't want projections. I want results. Liquidate the position before the market opens in Tokyo. I don't care what it takes." He didn't see Anya, not really. He saw an obstacle. His eyes flickered down to her cart, a momentary annoyance crossing his features. Without breaking stride or lowering his phone, he gestured sharply with his free hand, a curt, dismissive flick of the wrist. "Get that cart out of the way," he commanded, his words directed not at her, but at the air around her, as if expecting the universe itself to comply. Behind him, his second wife, Isabella Vance, glided forward. She was a woman sculpted by ambition, her beauty sharp and immaculate, her every movement calculated. She paused, her gaze sweeping over Anya with a look of profound distaste before she turned to Julian. "Darling, the service standards here seem to be slipping, don't they?" she murmured, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "One would think the Crestwood could afford staff who understand discretion." Anya felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, a flush of humiliation she had learned to swallow like a bitter pill. She said nothing. She simply rose, her movements fluid and silent, and began to push her cart toward the service corridor. But then she saw the daughter. Eleanor Ellie Croft, at 16, was the family's quiet anomaly. She lingered a step behind, clutching a worn copy of a poetry book. While her parents radiated a cold, polished certainty, Ellie's blue eyes held a different light, something softer, more observant, and deeply apologetic. Her gaze met Anya's for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement of the casual cruelty she had just witnessed. Then, with a resigned sigh, she followed her parents toward the gilded elevators, swallowed once more by her family's formidable shadow. Anya watched them go, her hands gripping the handle of her cart. The interaction had lasted no more than 15 seconds, but it was a perfect distillation of the world she had inhabited for the last 700 days. A world where her presence was an inconvenience, her humanity an afterthought. Julian Croft's dismissive gesture, Isabella's veiled insult, they weren't personal. And that, she knew, was precisely what made them so profoundly cruel. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a function, a uniform, a pair of hands to erase the smudges they left behind. She pushed her cart into the shadows of the service hallway, the scent of Isabella's expensive perfume, something heavy with jasmine and entitlement, lingering in the air. For a fleeting moment, the weight of her assumed identity pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. But then she straightened her shoulders, the memory of her grandfather's voice, warm and steady, echoing in her mind. Character, Amara, is forged in the moments when no one is watching. And in the silent, gilded halls of the Crestwood, Anya knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that someone was always watching. She was. The Croft family penthouse suite was less a hotel room and more a kingdom in the sky. Occupying the entire top floor of the Crestwood, its windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of Central Park, a sprawling tapestry of green and gold against the city's steel and glass skyline. The air was still, conditioned to a perfect 72 degrees, and smelled faintly of imported lilies and old money. But for Julian Croft, the palatial space felt more like a beautifully appointed prison, haunted by the ghost of a life he could no longer touch. He stood alone in his private study, a cavernous room lined with dark mahogany bookshelves and first-edition classics he hadn't opened in years. The unsigned contracts for a hostile takeover in the tech sector lay on his desk, a testament to his continued dominance in the world of finance. He was a king in this world, his name a synonym for ruthless efficiency. But here, in the silence, he was just a man adrift. His gaze was fixed on the single photograph that sat on the corner of his desk, a silver-framed memory that was both a comfort and a constant, aching wound. It was of his first wife, Sarah, her smile so radiant it seemed to defy the confines of the still image. She was holding a much younger Ellie, her face buried in her mother's hair, both of them caught in a moment of pure, unscripted joy. Sarah had been the architect of his happiness, the one who had softened his sharp edges and filled their life with a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. Her death, a sudden and brutal illness 2 years ago, hadn't just broken his heart. It had shattered his compass. He had thrown himself into his work, using billion-dollar deals and corporate warfare as a shield against the suffocating grief. He had convinced himself that maintaining the family's legacy, expanding the empire, was the only way to honor her memory. But in doing so, he had built a wall of cold ambition around himself, a wall that even his own daughter could no longer penetrate. The door to the study opened with a soft click, and Isabella entered, a vision in a cream-colored silk dressing gown. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of a panther, her smile perfectly calibrated for tenderness. "Darling, still working?" she murmured, gliding over to him and placing a perfectly manicured hand on his shoulder. "You promised you'd take a break before the gala preparations." Julian didn't turn from the photograph, just reviewing the quarterly reports. It was a lie. He hadn't looked at a single number. Isabella's eyes flickered to the picture of Sarah, a shadow of something unreadable passing through them before her smile returned, brighter and more determined. "She was beautiful," Isabella said, her tone dripping with rehearsed sympathy. "And you were so devoted. It's what I admire most about you, Julian, your loyalty." He finally turned to look at her. Isabella was everything Sarah hadn't been, calculated where Sarah was spontaneous, polished where Sarah was genuine. He had married her a year after Sarah's death, a decision born of loneliness and a desperate need to restore a sense of order to his chaotic life. Isabella was an expert at order. She managed their social calendar, their household, even his relationship with Ellie, with the detached efficiency of a chief operating officer. She had made his life function again, but she had not made it feel alive. "The gala is critical tonight," she continued, her fingers gently massaging his tense shoulders. "The governor will be there, and Senator Hayes. Your speech needs to be perfect. It's our first major public appearance since the merger talks began." "I know," he said, his voice flat. "And Ellie," Isabella added with a sigh, "I have laid out the Dior gown for her. I do hope she doesn't put up a fight this time. She's been so difficult lately. All those gloomy books she reads." This was Isabella's subtle genius. She never criticized Ellie directly to him. Instead, she framed her concerns in a way that made Ellie seem like another problem to be managed, another variable in the complex equation of their public image. Julian, blinded by his grief and his reliance on Isabella's control, failed to see the slow, systematic isolation she was building around his daughter. He saw Ellie's quiet withdrawal not as a cry for connection, but as teenage moodiness, a temporary inconvenience. "She's a teenager, Isabella. They're supposed to be difficult," he said, though the words lacked conviction. "Of course, darling," Isabella cooed, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "You just focus on your speech. I'll handle Ellie. I'll handle everything." She left the room as silently as she had entered, leaving Julian alone once more with the ghost in the silver frame. He looked at Sarah's smiling face, then at the towering skyline outside his window. He was Julian Croft, a titan of industry, a man who controlled vast fortunes and shaped markets. But in the gilded cage of his own making, he was profoundly, terrifyingly blind. He saw the architecture of his empire, but had lost sight of the foundation of his own home, and he couldn't feel the cracks forming right beneath his feet. Anya's world was a universe away from the silent, air-conditioned opulence of the Crestwood's top floor. Her small studio apartment in Queens was a testament to a different kind of wealth, one measured in history, memory, and carefully tended books. A Murphy bed, cleverly disguised as a bookshelf during the day, allowed the modest space to feel open. The single large window didn't overlook a manicured park, but a vibrant, bustling street where the scent of roasting street corn mingled with the distant rhythm of a salsa beat. It was a room that was truly lived in, a space that breathed with the life of its occupant. Every evening after her shift, Anya would transform. The invisible housekeeper would shed her navy blue uniform, hang it carefully in the closet, and become herself again. She'd pull her hair from its tight bun, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders, and change into comfortable clothes. Her ritual was always the same: a cup of strong herbal tea and an hour with her grandfather's journals. These were not diaries of a wealthy man, but the meticulous records of a builder. Her grandfather, Elias Dubois, had been a quiet force, a man who saw value where others saw decay. The journals, bound in worn leather and filled with his elegant, slanting script, told the story of his rise from a carpenter in a small Louisiana town to a real estate magnate in New York. He wrote of buying derelict buildings in forgotten neighborhoods, of seeing the potential in their strong bones, and of the fierce joy he found in restoring them. He wrote about fighting discriminatory lending practices, about staring down city officials who saw his skin color before his business plan, and about the quiet satisfaction of handing a young family the keys to their first safe home. For Anya, these journals were more than just family history. They were her education. Tucked between blueprints and financial projections were Elias's philosophies on life. Never forget, Amara, he had written on one page, that the foundation of any strong structure, be it a building or a person, is its integrity. Without it, even the most beautiful facade will eventually crumble. This was the legacy she was set to inherit. $30 billion, a global real estate and investment firm, and a name that carried the weight of her grandfather's hard-won integrity. But the inheritance came with his final, most profound lesson, the 2-year experiment. You cannot lead an empire built to house people, his will had stipulated, until you have walked in the shoes of those who are invisible within its walls. So she had become a housekeeper, moving from city to city, hotel to hotel, observing the world of the wealthy from the other side of the door. And what she had seen had been a revelation. She had witnessed quiet acts of kindness from people who had every reason to be arrogant, and breathtaking cruelty from those who preached charity. She had learned to read the subtle language of power, the way a casual command could feel like a physical blow, the way a dismissive glance could erase a person's humanity. In a small, unassuming notebook, a stark contrast to her grandfather's leather-bound journals, Anya documented her own findings. Her observations were not about dust or smudges, but about the human condition. The man in 12B, she wrote one night, shouts at his wife on the phone, but tips the bellman $50 with a smile. He values the performance of generosity more than the practice of kindness. Another entry read, "The woman in the penthouse suite leaves behind half-eaten plates of exquisite food, a testament to a hunger that has nothing to do with sustenance. Wealth has given her everything but an appetite for her own life." These observations were sharp, insightful, and often heartbreaking. She was seeing firsthand the moral rot that her grandfather had warned her about, the spiritual emptiness that no amount of money could fill. Her time at the Crestwood was the final leg of her journey, and the Croft family was her final, most potent case study. She knew of Julian Croft by reputation, of course. Dubois Global and Croft Industries were competitors in some markets, allies in others. Her grandfather had mentioned him once, years ago. "A brilliant mind," Elias had said, "but he builds skyscrapers, not homes. He understands value, but I'm not sure he understands worth." Now, Anya was seeing the truth of that assessment up close. She saw a man so lost in the architecture of his grief and ambition that he failed to see the crumbling foundation of his own family. She saw a man who commanded boardrooms but could not connect with his own child. As she sat in her small, quiet apartment, surrounded by the tangible evidence of her grandfather's legacy, Anya felt the weight of her own future settling upon her. In a few short weeks, this experiment would be over. The uniform would be put away for good, and she would step into a world of boardrooms, of billion-dollar decisions, of immense, world-shaping power. She picked up a framed photo of her grandfather, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a familiar, warm intelligence. "Are you ready?" his gaze seemed to ask. Anya didn't know. But as she thought of the cold dismissal in Julian Croft's eyes and the silent plea in his daughter's, she knew one thing for certain. She would not build skyscrapers. She would build homes. And she would start by remembering the people who were still invisible inside them. The air in the Croft penthouse suite, just an hour before the much-anticipated Heart of Gold charity gala, was thick with the scent of hairspray and simmering tension. Anya had received the summons via a curt call from the head housekeeper. "Suite 1801, Mrs. Croft has a Special request. Be quick and be quiet. She arrived to a scene of controlled chaos. A makeup artist was applying the final touches to Isabella's flawless face, while a harried-looking stylist made microscopic adjustments to the straps of her gown. Julian stood by the window, already in his tuxedo, dictating a last-minute email to his assistant. Ellie was nowhere to be seen. Isabella didn't acknowledge Anya's presence at first, continuing to stare at her reflection in the full-length mirror, as if Anya were just another piece of furniture. The gown she wore was a masterpiece of white silk, a stark, angelic column that shimmered with thousands of hand-sewn crystals. It was a dress designed to command attention, to declare its owner's purity and grace to the world. "Finally," Isabella said, her eyes meeting Anya's in the mirror. Her voice was bored, dismissive. "I need you to handle this." She gestured vaguely toward the dressing table, where a bottle of vintage Bordeaux sat next to a single, long-stemmed glass. "Pour me a glass, just a small one. It calms the nerves before these dreadful events." Anya moved to the table, her hands steady as she picked up the heavy bottle. She knew this was a test, a small performance of power. The simple act of having a housekeeper pour a drink was a reminder of the hierarchy, a reinforcement of who served and who was served. She carefully poured a small amount of the deep red liquid into the crystal glass, the wine catching the light like liquid rubies. She turned to hand the glass to Isabella, who was now standing, admiring her reflection. As Anya stepped forward, Isabella made a sudden, almost imperceptible movement, a slight pivot, a quick turn as if to speak to her stylist. The motion was just enough to intercept Anya's path. The collision was minor, but the result was catastrophic. The glass tilted, and the dark red wine cascaded down the front of Isabella's pristine white gown, a violent, ugly stain that bloomed across the silk like a fresh wound. For a moment, the room fell into a shocked silence. The makeup artist gasped. The stylist's hands flew to her mouth. Julian ended his call, his head snapping around to the source of the commotion. Isabella looked down at her ruined dress, her expression transforming from feigned surprise to theatrical horror. Then she turned her gaze on Anya, her eyes blazing with a cold, calculated fury. "You clumsy, incompetent fool!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the silent suite. "Look what you've done. This is a couture gown. Do you have any idea what this costs?" Anya stood frozen, the empty, wine-stained glass still in her hand. She had seen the move, the subtle, deliberate shift of Isabella's body. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution. I'm so sorry, Ma'am," Anya stammered, the required words of apology feeling like stones in her mouth. "Sorry?" Isabella's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "Sorry doesn't fix a $20,000 dress. What is wrong with you people? Can't you do the simplest task without destroying everything you touch?" Julian strode forward, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. In his world, the fault always lay with the person holding the tray, never with the one wearing the gown. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice directed at Anya like a weapon. "Are you blind? Are you incompetent? I have a major charity event to attend in less than an hour, a speech to give, and my wife is now without a dress because of your carelessness." He took a step closer, his towering frame looming over her. "You are finished here. I will personally call the manager of this hotel. I will see to it that you are not only fired, but that you never work in a respectable establishment in this city again. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, brutal and absolute. This was the raw, unfiltered power of a man like Julian Croft, the ability to erase a person's livelihood with a single, angry pronouncement. The stylist and makeup artist had retreated to the corner of the room, their faces pale, avoiding eye contact, as if the fury in the room might be contagious. Anya felt the blood pounding in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to expose Isabella's lie, to reveal the truth. She could end this right now. She could utter a single sentence, make a single call, and bring this man and his cruel, manipulative wife to their knees. But she didn't. She looked at Julian's face, contorted with an anger born not of a ruined dress, but of his own inner turmoil. She saw a man so lost in his performance of power that he was blind to the truth right in front of him. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just about a spilled glass of wine. It was about everything her grandfather had wanted her to see. "I understand, sir," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I will accept the consequences." Her submission seemed to fuel his rage further. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." As Anya turned to leave, her eyes met Isabella's, and for a fraction of a second, she saw it. A flicker of pure, triumphant malice in the other woman's eyes. It was the look of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. The injustice was a physical weight in Anya's chest, heavy and suffocating. She walked toward the door, the silent, damning judgment of everyone in the room following her. This was the moment of her deepest humiliation, the nadir of her 2-year journey into the world of the invisible. And as the sweet door closed behind her, leaving her alone in the quiet, empty hallway, she felt the first hot tear finally escape and trace a silent path down her cheek. Anya didn't flee. She stood in the silent, carpeted hallway outside the penthouse suite, the sound of her own ragged breathing loud in her ears. The polished wood of the door felt cool and final against her back. Inside, she could hear Isabella's voice, a high-pitched lament about the irreplaceable nature of the gown, and Julian's low, rumbling growl as he made calls, undoubtedly to the hotel management, to make good on his threat. The world she had so carefully observed for 2 years had finally turned on her, and the injustice was a raw, physical ache. She took a deep, steadying breath, wiping the single tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Panic is a luxury you cannot afford," her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "When they expect you to break, you must find your center." Instead of retreating to the service elevator, defeated, she did something no one in that suite would have anticipated. She raised her hand and knocked on the door, a firm, deliberate rap that cut through the internal drama. The door swung open. Julian stood there, phone in hand, his face a mask of incredulous fury. "What in God's name are you still doing here? I told you to get out." Anya met his gaze without flinching. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the cowed whisper of a disgraced maid, but the calm, measured tone of a problem solver. "Sir, I believe I can fix the dress." Julian stared at her as if she had sprouted a second head. "Fix it? It's ruined. It's couture silk stained with Bordeaux. Are you insane?" From behind him, Isabella laughed, a sound sharp with mockery. "Oh, this is rich. The maid who destroyed a designer gown now thinks she's a miracle worker. Please do us all a favor and just disappear." "With all due respect, ma'am," Anya said, her focus remaining on Julian, "I have experience with delicate fabrics and difficult stains. My grandfather, he taught me a few things. If you allow me just 5 minutes, I can at least mitigate the damage. You have nothing to lose." Her composure was so absolute, so unshakable, that it momentarily disarmed him. He was a man who dealt in logic, in risk assessment, and she was right. The dress was already considered a total loss. What harm could 5 more minutes do? The sheer audacity of her proposal was, in itself, intriguing. He hesitated, then gave a curt, exasperated nod. "Fine, 5 minutes. But if you make it worse, I'll have you paying for this dress for the rest of your life." Anya stepped back into the suite, a space she had been violently ejected from only moments before. She ignored Isabella's contemptuous glare and the skeptical looks from the stylist and makeup artist. She moved with quiet purpose, first to the ensuite bathroom, then to the minibar. She returned with a bottle of club soda, a small bowl of salt from a tray of cashews, and a clean, white cotton towel. She knelt on the floor beside the gown, which Isabella had dramatically discarded onto a velvet chaise. "May I?" she asked, a simple courtesy that seemed to momentarily stun Isabella into silence. Working with a surgeon's precision, Anya gently blotted the stain with the towel, then sprinkled a layer of salt over the affected area to absorb the excess wine. She let it sit for a minute before carefully brushing it away. Then she saturated a clean section of the towel with club soda and began to blot the stain again, working from the outside in, her movements deft and confident. The room watched in a tense, fascinated silence. This was not the fumbling of an amateur. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The skill was so unexpected, so out of place with their perception of her, that it created a cognitive dissonance that held them captive. As she worked, the deep burgundy of the stain began to lighten, breaking apart under her patient ministration. It wasn't disappearing completely, but the ugly, aggressive blotch was fading into a pale, almost negligible shadow of its former self. And then a new voice entered the scene. "What's going on?" Ellie Croft stood in the doorway of her bedroom, drawn out by the strange quiet that had descended on the suite. She took in the scene at a glance. Her mother's discarded, stained dress, her father standing with his arms crossed, and Anya, the maid, kneeling on the floor, performing what looked like a quiet miracle. Ellie had seen the whole thing from her room. She had watched through her cracked open door as Isabella pivoted, as the wine spilled, as her father unleashed his fury. She had seen the lie. "She didn't do it," Ellie said, her voice clear and unwavering. Julian turned to his daughter, his expression hardening. "Eleanor, this does not concern you. Go back to your room." "No," Ellie said, taking a step forward. "It does concern me. I saw it. Isabella, you turned into her. You spilled the wine on purpose." Isabella gasped, placing a hand to her chest in a gesture of wounded innocence. "Ellie, how can you say such a thing? I would never." "I saw you," Ellie repeated, her eyes locked on her stepmother. "You wanted to get her in trouble. You wanted Dad to be angry at her." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Julian looked from his daughter's resolute face to his wife's theatrical display of hurt, and for the first time a seed of doubt began to sprout in his mind. He had been so quick to anger, so certain in his judgment. But Ellie, his quiet, observant Ellie, was not prone to flights of fancy or baseless accusations. He looked down at Anya, who had paused in her work, her head bowed as if trying to remain invisible in the crossfire she had inadvertently caused. He saw the quiet dignity in her posture, the steady competence in her hands. He recalled her composure in the lobby, her articulate response that had so irritated him. Nothing about this woman fit the simple, dismissive category he had placed her in. The 5 minutes were up. The wine stain was now a faint, blush-colored ghost on the white silk, barely visible unless you knew where to look. With a final blot, Anya stood up. "It will need professional treatment to be fully removed," she said quietly to the stylist, "but it should be wearable for tonight." She gathered her materials, bowed her head slightly toward Julian, and turned to leave, her part in the drama seemingly complete. "Wait," Julian said. His voice was different now, the anger gone, replaced by something uncertain, something questioning. Anya paused at the door. He looked at his daughter, whose eyes were still blazing with youthful, righteous anger. He looked at his wife, whose performance of victimhood suddenly seemed transparent and cheap. And then he looked at the woman in the simple blue uniform, who had responded to his rage not with fear or anger, but with an offer of help, with a display of skill so profound it defied all his assumptions. The foundation of his certainty had cracked. The world, which had seemed so simple and well-ordered just moments ago, was suddenly complex, filled with questions he didn't know how to ask. And at the center of it all was this quiet, enigmatic housekeeper who seemed to know more than she was saying. "What is your name?" he asked, the question a genuine inquiry for the first time. "Anya, sir," she replied. "Amara Dubois." And though the name meant nothing to him yet, it hung in the air between them, a promise of a much larger, more complicated truth that was just beginning to unravel. Guilt is a poor motivator for most, but for Eleanor Croft, it was a catalyst. The scene in the penthouse replayed in her mind on a relentless loop. The calculated cruelty of her stepmother, her father's blind rage, and most vividly, Anya's quiet, unshakable dignity in the face of it all. Ellie knew she couldn't erase what had happened, but she could not let it stand unchallenged. She had to find Anya. She had to apologize. She didn't look in the bustling staff cafeteria or the noisy break room in the sub-basement. An instinct she couldn't explain told her that Anya wouldn't be found in a place of idle chatter. Instead, Ellie was drawn to the one place in the Crestwood that felt like a sanctuary of silence and thought, the hotel's grand, two-story library. The library was a relic from a more elegant era, a cathedral of knowledge with towering shelves of leather-bound books, rolling ladders, and the hushed, reverent quiet of a forgotten church. The air smelled of old paper, beeswax, and the faint, clean scent of lemon polish. Green-shaded reading lamps cast pools of warm light onto heavy oak tables, creating intimate islands in the vast, shadowed space. And there, in one of those islands of light, sat Anya. She wasn't scrolling on a phone or staring blankly into space. She was seated at a table, her back straight, her posture poised, and spread before her was a copy of that morning's Wall Street Journal. She held the paper with a familiarity and focus that was utterly at odds with the uniform she wore. She wasn't just skimming the headlines, she was reading, her finger tracing a line of text in the international business section, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. Ellie approached the table with hesitant steps, feeling like an intruder in a private, sacred moment. "Anya?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. Anya looked up, her expression shifting from focused analysis to a mild, polite surprise. She carefully folded the newspaper and set it aside, giving Ellie her full, undivided attention. There was no trace of the humiliation from an hour ago in her eyes, only a calm, steady gaze. "Miss Croft," she said, her tone respectful but not subservient. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Please, call me Ellie," the girl said, pulling out the chair opposite Anya and sitting down. "And I came to apologize for what my family did, for what they said. It was horrible. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." A gentle warmth entered Anya's eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for, Ellie. You are not responsible for the actions of others." "But I'm part of that family," Ellie insisted, her hands twisting in her lap. "And I saw what Isabella did. It wasn't an accident." "I know," Anya said softly, and the simple validation in those two words made Ellie feel a profound sense of relief. Ellie glanced at the folded newspaper on the table. "You were reading the business section. Most people find it boring." Anya allowed a small, wry smile to touch her lips. "The world is run by the people who read the boring sections, Ellie. It's where they hide the rules." She tapped a finger on the paper. "This article, for instance, it's about supply chain disruptions in Southeast Asia, but it's not really about shipping containers. It's about how a single microchip factory in Taiwan can hold the global economy hostage. It's about leverage." She spoke with an effortless clarity and depth that left Ellie momentarily speechless. This wasn't the talk of a housekeeper. This was the analysis of a strategist, of someone who understood the intricate, invisible machinery that made the world turn. It was the way her father used to talk, back before the grief had hardened him, before he only spoke of profits and losses. "I didn't know you were interested in that," Ellie said, gesturing vaguely at the paper. "I'm interested in how things work," Anya replied simply. The honesty of the moment emboldened Ellie. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Anya, I think my stepmother is planning something to hurt my dad." Anya listened, her expression calm and attentive as Ellie recounted her growing suspicions about Isabella. The hushed phone calls, the secret meetings with lawyers, the cold ambition that she tried so hard to hide behind a mask of affection. Anya didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. She just listened, giving Ellie the one thing she so clearly craved, the feeling of being truly seen and heard. "I don't know who to talk to," Ellie finished, her voice thick with a frustrated helplessness. "My dad. He doesn't see it. He wants to, I think, but he's so lost." Anya was quiet for a long moment, considering the young girl across from her. She saw not just a privileged teenager, but a lonely child trying to protect a father who was too blind to see the danger he was in. She had found an unexpected and potentially invaluable ally. "Sometimes," Anya said, her voice gentle but firm, "the people closest to the problem are the last ones to see it clearly. They're too afraid of what they might find." She pushed the folded newspaper slightly toward Ellie. "If you want to understand how things work, Ellie, you have to be willing to read the fine print." It wasn't a promise of help, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, a shared understanding. As Ellie stood to leave, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She was no longer just a helpless observer of her family's dysfunction. She was a girl with a secret, a suspicion, and now, for the first time, an ally. And in the quiet, sunlit library, a silent pact had been forged between the overlooked heiress and the underestimated housekeeper. A partnership that would soon bring the entire Croft empire to a reckoning. Anya's words, "You have to be willing to read the fine print," echoed in Ellie's mind, transforming from a simple piece of advice into a mission. Armed with a new sense of purpose, Ellie began her own quiet investigation, a covert operation conducted within the gilded walls of her own home. She had always been observant, a silent spectator in her family's grand theater. But now her observations became focused, her gaze sharpened by suspicion. She was no longer just watching, she was hunting for the fine print in her stepmother's life. Her first target was Isabella's private study. It was a room that was strictly off-limits, a space Isabella called her sanctuary, filled with antique furniture, art books, and the scent of expensive, cloying potpourri. Ellie waited for the perfect opportunity, a morning when Isabella was at a lengthy charity board luncheon and her father was sequestered in a series of back-to-back conference calls. Slipping into the study felt like crossing into enemy territory. The silence was different here, heavier and more calculated than the rest of the penthouse. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs as she moved toward the ornate 18th century French desk that served as the room's centerpiece. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. A letter, a diary, anything that might give substance to her formless fears. She started with the desk drawers, her fingers moving quickly through files of household receipts, correspondence with designers, and invitations to social events. Everything seemed innocuous, the mundane paperwork of a wealthy socialite's life. But in the bottom right-hand drawer, tucked beneath a stack of stationery, she found it. A slim, leather-bound portfolio secured with a small brass lock. The lock was simple, the kind meant more for privacy than for serious security. Ellie's mind raced. A bobby pin? A paperclip? She remembered a scene from an old spy movie and with a surge of adrenaline pulled a pin from her hair. Her hands trembled as she inserted the thin piece of metal into the lock, fumbling at first. Then, with a surprising click, the lock sprang open. She lifted the cover. The portfolio contained not personal letters or a secret diary, but a sheaf of dense, official-looking documents. Her eyes scanned the first page, and her blood ran cold. The heading was stark and clear: Contingency Directive and Power of Attorney. Her legal vocabulary was limited, but she understood enough to recognize the gravity of what she was holding. Page after page detailed a meticulous legal strategy. The documents were drafted by a law firm she'd never heard of, Vance and Sterling, not her father's long-standing corporate counsel. They outlined a scenario in which Julian Croft, due to diminished mental or physical capacity, would cede complete and irrevocable control of his personal assets, his voting shares in Croft Industries, and his estate to his wife, Isabella Vance Croft. The language was a labyrinth of legal jargon, fiduciary transfer, incapacity clauses, non-revocable trust, but the intent was as clear as glass. It was a legal coup, a meticulously crafted trap waiting to be sprung. It wasn't a standard prenuptial agreement or a simple will. This was a blueprint for the complete appropriation of her father's empire. One clause, heavily underlined, stood out. Upon written certification from 2 licensed physicians attesting to the subject's inability to manage his own affairs, this directive shall be executed immediately and without contest. 2 licensed physicians. Isabella wasn't just waiting for her father to fail, she was building the mechanism to declare him a failure. Ellie's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the papers. This was it. This was the hidden trap Anya had alluded to, the ugly truth concealed beneath a veneer of civility. Her stepmother wasn't just a cold and ambitious woman, she was a predator, patiently waiting for the moment to strike. Knowing she couldn't take the original documents, Ellie pulled out her phone. With trembling fingers, she photographed every single page, her phone's soft click sounding like a cannon blast in the silent room. She captured the letterhead of the unknown law firm, the detailed clauses, and, most damningly, the final page. A signature line for her father, still ominously blank, and a line for Isabella, already signed with a confident, looping flourish. She carefully placed the documents back in the portfolio, relocked the brass clasp, and slid the portfolio back into the drawer, exactly where she had found it. She smoothed the stationery on top, leaving no trace of her intrusion. As she slipped out of the study and back into the familiar territory of the penthouse hallway, she felt a profound shift within herself. The vague unease had solidified into cold, hard certainty. She now held the fine print in her hands, digital, undeniable proof of her stepmother's betrayal. The weight of this knowledge was terrifying, but it was also empowering. She was no longer just a suspicious daughter. She was a witness, and she knew exactly who she needed to show the evidence to. Ellie found Anya in the late afternoon in the quiet, sun-drenched solitude of the hotel's rooftop garden. It was a hidden oasis, a secret known only to a few long-term guests and senior staff, a place of terracotta pots filled with lavender and rosemary, and a view that stretched all the way to the hazy silhouette of the Statue of Liberty. Anya was on a designated staff break, sitting on a simple wooden bench, not with a newspaper this time, but with a small worn paperback, its cover softened with use. She looked up as Ellie approached, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at being found in this secluded spot. She closed her book, marking her page with a stray leaf, and gave Ellie a small, welcoming smile. Ellie didn't waste time with pleasantries. The urgency of what she had discovered was a coiled spring in her chest. She sat down beside Anya, the silence of the rooftop garden a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. "Anya," she began, her voice a hushed, nervous whisper, "I found something. Something bad." Anya turned her full attention to Ellie, her calm presence an immediate anchor in the girl's sea of anxiety. "What did you find?" Without a word, Ellie pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled as she navigated to the photo gallery and held the screen out for Anya to see. One by one, she swiped through the images of the legal documents, the heading of the contingency directive, the dense, impenetrable clauses, the section on diminished capacity, and finally, the damning signature page with Isabella's name already inscribed. Anya took the phone, her expression unreadable as she methodically scrolled through the pictures. She didn't gasp or exclaim. Instead, she read, her eyes moving over the legal text with the same focused intensity Ellie had seen her apply to the Wall Street Journal. She zoomed in on certain phrases, her lips moving slightly as she absorbed the full, venomous weight of the document's intent. The casual observer might have thought she was reading a train schedule, but Ellie could feel the stillness in Anya, the quiet gathering of a formidable intelligence. When she finished, she handed the phone back to Ellie. Her face was grave, but her eyes were clear and steady. "She's been planning this for a long time," Anya said, the statement a simple, chilling fact. "This isn't a recent development. The legal framework is too sophisticated. This took months, maybe longer, to structure." "What does it all mean?" Ellie asked, her voice small, needing to hear the truth articulated by someone else. "I know it's bad, but—" "It means," Anya said, her voice low and precise, "that she has created a legal mechanism to strip your father of his power, his assets, and his autonomy. All she needs is the signature of 2 doctors to declare him mentally unfit, and she gains control of everything. It's a complete and total takeover, perfectly legal on the surface." The clinical explanation made it sound even more horrifying. "She's trying to have him committed," Ellie whispered, the words tasting like poison. Or something close to it, Anya confirmed. She's creating a narrative of his decline. The fall you mentioned, any public confusion, any sign of emotional distress, it will all be used as evidence to support her claim. A new, terrifying thought dawned on Ellie. The gala, my father's speech, he was supposed to hint at a Senate run, if he's declared mentally incompetent. His political ambitions are destroyed before they even begin, Anya finished for her. And his most vocal opponent would be his own devoted wife, forced to reveal his tragic decline to protect him. It's a brilliant, ruthless strategy. The sheer scale of the betrayal left Ellie breathless. This wasn't just about money. It was about the complete annihilation of her father's identity, his legacy. "What do I do?" Ellie asked, her eyes pleading with Anya. "I have to show him. I have to warn him." Anya was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant skyline. "If you show him this now," she said, thinking aloud, "what will he do? Will he believe you over the wife he trusts? Or will he confront her? If he confronts her, she will know she's been discovered. She will accelerate her plan, or worse, she will find a way to discredit you, to paint you as a hysterical, untrustworthy child. She is already laying that groundwork. Anya's strategic mind was working, analyzing the variables, predicting the moves and countermoves. Right now, Ellie, our greatest advantage is that she doesn't know we know. We are invisible to her. You are a moody teenager. I am just the maid. She doesn't see us as threats." The way she said "we" and "us" sent a wave of relief through Ellie. She wasn't alone in this. A woman she had known for less than 24 hours, a woman her family had treated with utter contempt, had just become her sole confidant, her partner in a silent conspiracy. "So we wait?" Ellie asked, the idea of inaction agonizing. "We don't wait," Anya corrected gently. "We prepare. We gather more information. We understand the full scope of her plan, and we choose the time and place for the reveal, not when she expects it, but when it will have the most impact." Anya stood up and walked to the edge of the rooftop garden, looking down at the city below. "Your stepmother thinks she is playing chess," Anya said, her voice infused with a steely resolve. "She has carefully positioned all her pieces for the final checkmate." She turned back to Ellie, a flicker of something powerful and determined in her eyes. "What she doesn't realize," Anya said, "is that we are about to overturn the entire board." The night of the Heart of Gold gala arrived, and the Crestwood's grand ballroom had been transformed into a breathtaking fantasy of ivory and gold. The air itself seemed to shimmer, thick with the scent of 1,000 white orchids and the quiet, confident hum of New York's philanthropic elite. To the outside world, this was the pinnacle of society, a night of performative generosity and carefully curated power. To Anya and Ellie, it was a battlefield. Anya moved through the glittering crowd, no longer in her housekeeper's uniform, but in the crisp black and white attire of the event's catering staff. The switch was a lateral move in the hotel's hierarchy, but it granted her a different kind of invisibility. She was no longer a ghost in the hallways, but a functional part of the evening's machinery, her presence accepted but unexamined as she refilled champagne flutes and cleared away canapes. This proximity was her cover, allowing her to watch and listen undetected. Ellie, meanwhile, was playing her own part, a more difficult one. Dressed in a stunning but constricting Dior gown, she sat at the Croft family's front row table, a portrait of youthful elegance. But beneath the polished facade, she was a nervous wreck, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes constantly scanning the room for Anya, for her father, for the ever-present threat of her stepmother. Isabella was in her element. She moved through the room like a queen holding court, her white silk gown, now flawlessly restored, a beacon of angelic purity.